And then what happened, Mr. President? Well, I'll tell you what happened. The National Defense Authorization Act, the defense bill, went to conference, and there, despite the strong bipartisan vote on this floor, there it was removed in a backroom deal. Senator McConnell and others led the charge to remove this provision. And what was the rationale? What were we told? Why was it that nuclear radiation victims from Missouri to Kentucky to Tennessee to Alaska cannot be compensated according to so-called leadership? What was the rationale, Mr. President? No, I remember it vividly. I've heard it. It rings in my ears every day. The rationale is we don't have the money. The rationale is it's too expensive to do right by the American people who have suffered and died because of their government's nuclear radiation program. The rationale was we can't possibly afford it. That was the rationale. And now, lo and behold, I turn, Mr. President, to this bill before us, and I find we seem to have unlimited sums of money when it comes to foreign wars. Good Lord, when it comes to funding the machinery of war, we have money, we have money, we have money that we couldn't possibly dream of. We can run the presses indefinitely if it's going to go overseas. If we're going to be paying foreign governments, why, we've got enough money, apparently, to send $8 billion direct to the treasury of Ukraine. My goodness, we have enough money to make hundreds of millions of dollars of our taxpayer funds available to the private sector in Ukraine. We are now literally funding their businesses, their banks, Lord knows what. We've got money without end. We've got enough money to pay for bureaucrats' salaries. We've got enough money to pay for Ukrainian government officials' pensions. We've got enough money for so-called humanitarian aid that gets funneled away from, siphoned off into any manner of corrupt uses. We won't know because we don't have a special inspector general to oversee this money, but that's a different story. Oh no, we've got plenty of money. And I have listened carefully to colleague after colleague of mine come to this floor and stand where I am now and say, it's so important that we spend this money on these overseas wars. We must spend the money. If we don't spend this money now, why, it may cost us more money in the future. No, it's imperative. It's imperative that we spend this money. Meanwhile, these same people turn to the citizens of Missouri and say, you're not worth a dime. They say, you can't have a penny. They turn to the residents of Kentucky and Tennessee and Alaska and New Mexico and Arizona and Utah and Texas, and they say, we don't care that you were poisoned. We don't have a dime for you. We have unlimited money for Ukraine. We're going to rebuild the borders of Ukraine. That's in this bill, but we don't have anything for you. We are probably, for all I know, paying for radiation exposure compensation for Ukrainians in this bill. We very well could be, Mr. President. We'll never know because there'll never be an accounting. But the contrast strikes me as not only stark, it strikes me as absurd. It strikes me as absurd. If worse than that, it strikes me as grossly unjust. Listen, if you want to give money to overseas military operations, I think you're making a mistake when it comes to Ukraine. I think doing it without oversight is a serious mistake. I think doing it in a way that seriously harms our position in the Pacific, which is our most important foreign policy challenge, is a serious mistake. I think doing it before we secure our own border is a serious mistake. But given all of that, if you want to give money to foreign wars in Ukraine, that's one thing. But to turn around and say, we have plenty of money for that endeavor, we have unlimited sums of money for that endeavor, but we have nothing for the people in the United States of America, we have nothing for those who are sick and dying of cancer because of their government's action. To say that, Mr. President, is not only a juxtaposition that strikes the mind. To say that is manifestly unjust. To say that is wrong. To say that cannot be sustained, Mr. President. To say that is a scar on the conscience of this body. It cannot be that we have unlimited sums of cash for foreign wars and we have nothing for the needs of our own people who our own government has hurt and poisoned. That cannot be true in this country. It cannot be. Which is why, Mr. President, I will soon demand again that this body vote to make good on this government's commitment to help those whom its government has poisoned. But I hope and expect that when that time soon comes, we will not hear talk about how expensive it is to clean up after the federal government, how expensive it is for all of these Americans, hundreds of thousands of them who've been poisoned by the government, how expensive it is for them after we have been treated to speech after speech, hour upon hour, day upon day, of just how important it is to spend this money in Ukraine. If it's good enough for the Ukrainians, surely it's good enough for the American people. Surely, Mr. President, it is good enough for the American people. And what of those in East Palestine? Here we are, a year now, since the train derailment, the explosions, the chemical spill in that state. And it's not just, of course, the residents right there, as devastating as it was for East Palestine, but those chemical agents spilled into the waterways, eventually meeting up with the Mississippi, carrying those toxic agents all the way down, including into my state of Missouri, affecting everybody who lives along the river and in the greater watershed area. And I just note again, Mr. President, what is it that this body has seen fit to do for the residents of East Palestine? Has that crisis been addressed? Has that spill been cleaned up? Has our river been cleaned? No. Have we voted on a railway safety bill? No. No. We haven't lifted a finger, this body hasn't, to do anything to help the residents of East Palestine or anybody else downstream from that crisis. Certainly the people of Missouri haven't gotten an ounce of relief. Nothing. Nothing. But we have unlimited time, unlimited resources, and unlimited rhetoric for our foreign wars. There is a moral incongruity here that cannot be sustained. It cannot be that the American people will constantly be asked to be fodder for our foreign wars and adventures while their needs are overlooked, overshadowed, and put to one side. It is not sustainable, Madam President. It is not right